This series, focusing on the case of Jeremy Bamber and the White House Farm murders, was created using multiple sources, which are available upon request. I do, however, want to draw specific attention to the books by Colin Caffell, In Search of the Rainbow's End, Carol Ann Lee's text, The Murders at White House Farm, and Blood Relations, Jeremy Bamber and the White House Farm Murders by Roger Wilkes. Without these pieces, this 10-part arc would not have been possible, and they contain many details I have not included, so I would definitely recommend picking up a copy of these well put together works. Now, let's head to the episode.
Please be advised, this episode does have content that some may find distressing. As always, listener discretion is advised and it is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13.
Welcome to It's Murder Up North, and this, a continuation of the Wakefield Prison series, focusing on inmate Jeremy Bamber and the White House Farm murders. The American preacher and philosopher Jonathan Edwards wrote, "There are always two sides to every story, and it is generally wise and safe and charitable to take the best. And yet there is probably no one way in which persons are so liable to be wrong, as in presuming the worst is true, and in forming and expressing their judgment of others and of their actions without waiting till all the truth is known." The murders at White House Farm exemplifies this statement, with one story being believed before all the facts were collated. Yet even today, 4 decades after the horrific events of August 7, 1985, questions linger, and one man continues to declare that the truth is still not known. He is Jeremy Bamber, who has resided in multiple prisons throughout the years, including Wakefield, and as stated at the end of the Dennis Nielsen arc, a run-in between the two convicted men may have given the latter a glimpse at the killer behind Bamber's charming facade. Join me over the next 10 episodes as I delve into the deaths at White House Farm and consider both sides of the story. I shall be looking at who the Bamber family were, the investigation and trial, and the speculations which have lingered around the case for 40 years, ranging from the criticisms aimed at Essex police to the validity of evidence, and the potential motives of various individuals connected to the case. But first, let's take a deep dive into the family at the heart of this story. June and Neville Bamber were a couple whose respective families possessed wealth and influence, with the pair having accumulated a substantial estate of their own, which would one day be passed on to their own children. However, their journey to parenthood was paved with heartbreak and psychological scars. With the couple experiencing difficulties conceiving, they turned to adoption to fulfill a desire which would tragically end with their deaths at the hands of the child they had yearned for. In 1985, the papers were filled with the news of the well-respected couple's demise. They were seen as pillars of the community, a successful farmer and his devoted wife. But there was more to their story, which speaks of incredible bravery and a secret career. The details of the latter are still classified today. But let us start at the beginning of their story. June Speakman entered the world on June 3, 1924, as one of the 2 daughters of Mabel and Leslie Speakman, with her growing up alongside her older sister Pamela in the quaint Essex village of Goldhanger, where they resided in the 18th century Faulty Manor, a familial home filled with history and cherished memories. The house stood as a central hub for the girls' parents, Mabel and Leslie, who managed the tenancies of 6 neighbouring farms. Amongst these was White House Farm, located less than a mile south of the village of Tol St Darcy. Mabel and Leslie provided their daughters with a rich and stable childhood. The girls attended a private school, partook in dance classes, and attended church every Sunday. The Speakmans also taught their children the importance of hard work, teaching them cooking, cleaning and sewing, as well as involving them in the running of a household and farm. Another business venture the girls would be involved in was Osier Road Caravan Park, which Mabel started from very humble beginnings. It had originally been a place for pea pickers to pitch a tent where they could sleep after a day's work in the field. It grew into a small campground, and soon they introduced static caravans, welcoming holidaymakers to enjoy the scenic location. The caravan site is bordered to the south by the River Blackwater, which flows eastward within a mile of Whitehouse Farm before it expands into an estuary and continues its journey to the North Sea. To the north of the campsite lies the idyllic open countryside of Essex, a patchwork of lush green fields interspersed with charming villages and farms. While just over 2 miles to the west lies the historic market town of Malden, where Pamela and June attended the private grammar school. June completed her education just as the Second World War began, and she would play her part in the war effort. First, she took a position as a typist at the Fire Guard Service headquarters in Colchester, one of many centres established during the conflict, tasked with coordinating firefighting efforts, recording incidents of bombings and any damage or casualties. June would, however, take on a more challenging and potentially dangerous role, having applied for a position at the War Office. In 1944, she interviewed with the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry. They worked alongside the Special Operations Executive, helping with casualty transport, communications, and some secret operations. Accepted to the role, June was trained to be a wireless operator, expected to work quickly and accurately while handling sensitive information. Before being deployed, she received parachute training and learned about resistance and sabotage techniques. She also attended a finishing school to learn proper behaviour and etiquette. These skills aimed to help her blend in and avoid actions that could raise suspicion. Due to the sensitive nature of the role, June signed the Official Secrets Act, with some of her service records still sealed today. However, Carol Ann Lee's book, The Murders at Whitehouse Farm, shares some details about her service, including June's first deployment in early 1945. At just 21 years old, June arrived in Mahad near New Delhi, India, and later she was moved to Calcutta. There she helped send messages to and from special operatives in Japanese territory. After being away from home for almost a year, June returned to Essex in December 1945, officially finishing her military career with her demobilisation in February 1946. Keeping her wartime experiences a closely guarded secret, June settled back into life on the farm, assisting her parents with their business and considering her future as a mother and housewife. In the following years, her sister Pamela married Robert Boutflower. The newlyweds received a small farmstead to manage, where they started their family, having 2 children, David and Anne. It wouldn't be long before June would also be walking down the aisle. Given her family's standing in the area, June was a highly sought-after match, with her turning down several eligible suitors who vied for her attention. Yet everything changed when a newcomer arrived to the village, capturing the gaze of the dark-haired, doe-eyed beauty. 6'4" Ralph Bamber came to the village of Goldhanger to work as a farmhand for June's sister Pamela and her brother-in-law Robert, after being assigned the position through his professor at the prestigious Royal Agricultural College. Tall and handsome, with an athletic build, Ralph Bamber, who was known by his middle name Neville, was born on the 8th of June 1924, just 5 days after his future wife. According to some accounts, Neville had very little contact with his father, Herbert Bamber, while others claim that he died while Neville was still a child, meaning he was raised alongside his sister Diana and Audrey by their mother, Beatrice, in a prestigious home known as Cliff House. Coming from high society, Beatrice was a wealthy woman in her own right. and she ran a small clothing boutique, allowing her to provide her children with a comfortable upbringing, which included a good education. At the age of 10, Neville was sent to board at Christ Hospital School in Horsham, West Sussex, where he excelled academically. However, any career plans he may have had were halted by the outbreak of World War II, and when he was just 17, Neville completed his schooling and enlisted in the Royal Air Force, becoming a skilled pilot. He participated in the American-led invasion of French Morocco and Algeria on November 8, 1942, known as Operation Torch. It was during one campaign that his plane crashed, resulting in serious spinal injuries that required a lengthy hospital stay in Lambert's Bay, South Africa. After returning to England for some time to recuperate, Neville was eager to continue his service, and he was deployed once more, this time to Jerusalem and then on to Egypt. Finally, he returned home in July 1945 and was demobilised in 1947. With his heroic actions during the war behind him, Neville turned his focus to the future and enrolled at the Royal Agricultural College in Cirencester, ready to pursue a career in farming. The institution was established in 1845 and was the first of its kind in the country. It was here that Neville Bamber came to the attention of Professor Robert Boutflower, CBE. The professor was held in high esteem. He had become the principal in 1931 and is credited on the institution's website as being, quote, largely responsible for raising the prestige of the college to its present high standards. When the professor passed away in 1961, he was remembered as the most capable, colourful, and forceful character that ever adorned the fields of agriculture. However, Professor Boutflower also played a part in Neville Bamber becoming acquainted with June Speakman. It was under his instruction that Neville was sent to work on the farm of the professor's son and namesake, Robert, and his daughter-in-law, Pamela, who was June's sister. Neville and June would become acquainted at a dance. This initial spark ignited a blossoming relationship that flourished on the tennis courts, where the pair were teamed up in mixed doubles. Neville quickly ingratiated himself into life in the Essex countryside, and over the years he would become a well-liked and respected figure in the community. By the time of his death, Neville didn't just run a successful farm under the name of N&J Bamber, but he also had connections with other businesses, including North Malton Growers. As testament to his hard work and dedication to the local area, he had also acted as Justice of the Peace, was a warden at the church, and also contributed to village events, as well as the local economy, with him employing and housing several people. His ties to the local community truly began when he married June Speakman on the 3rd of November 1949 at St. Peter's Church in Goldhanger, thus becoming entwined with a family who had a history in the area spanning generations and possessed a great deal of wealth and influence due to the properties and businesses they owned. Upon their marriage, Neville and June were provided a cottage on Wash Lane, close to June's parents' home of Balty Manor and the Osier Road Caravan Park. Yet within 2 years they would be granted the tenancy of White House Farm, a Georgian property steeped in a history that stretched over centuries, with its thick stone walls acting as a silent witness to the hardships, joys and tragedies experienced by its past tenants. One of the earliest recorded incidents connected to the farm was the death of 78-year-old Mr. Orville Page. It was reported that on Wednesday, September the 29th, 1887, Orville had gone about his daily routine in Tolsant, Dorset. He returned home that afternoon to the property he shared with Susan and Henry Ludgater. Heading off to bed at his usual time of 6:30, he bid good night to the housewife before disappearing into his room. Nothing seemed amiss until Susan was alerted to the sound of a gunshot. Fearful of what she may find, Susan sought the assistance of a neighbour, who ventured upstairs to the old man's room. The Chelmsford Chronicle reported on the scene that greeted the neighbour, stating, "The deceased was in a sitting position in the corner of the room, with the muzzle of the gun under his chin. A piece of string, with which the trigger had evidently been pulled, was round his right foot." It emerged that Orville Page, who had resided in the home for 42 years, had been given notice to vacate, leading to the supposition that this had driven him to end his own life. The Page surname, which is bestowed on the lane that leads to Whitehouse Farm, would taint the future home of the Bambers, when, in January 1892, Benjamin Page, a relative of Orville, died. Benjamin was said to have complained of pains in his head, which were made worse by inclement weather. The discomfort was such that he was unable to sleep and had become increasingly irritable. It was initially believed that this condition led to him being found unresponsive in his bedroom at Whitehouse Farm. However, when the attending doctor noticed a glass that appeared to contain crystals, the medical practitioner surmised that Benjamin had ingested poison. The well-liked retired farmer regained consciousness briefly and appeared to show improvement, but this only lasted a couple of days before he developed paralysis, and 8 days after consuming the poison, he succumbed to its effects. As with Orville before him, the cause of death was ruled to be suicide while in an unsound state of mind. The care of Whitehouse Farm fell into the hands of Benjamin's widow Elizabeth and her 2 sons, Frank and Hugh, with the former taking over the farm upon their mother's passing. In 1950, Hugh Page passed away, leaving behind his devastated brother Frank, who fell into a state of melancholy, confiding in his sister that he was struggling to cope. On the 10th of November 1950, Frank Page was found floating in the farm's water tank, which it appeared he had accessed by climbing on a tractor tyre. The post-mortem revealed that he had no water in his lungs, which ruled out drowning. He did, however, suffer from heart disease, with it being theorised that the shock of entering the icy water had caused the vital organ to stop. It was not known why he had entered the tank, with his state of mind possibly being a factor, yet ultimately his death was deemed to have been due to his diseased heart. The death of Frank Page instigated the need for a new tenant to take over the management of Whitehouse Farm, resulting in it being entrusted to June and Neville, who moved into the property in 1951. Sitting on 350 acres of land, the property boasted various outbuildings typically associated with a working farm, alongside some nearby cottages where several farmhands resided. Over the years, Neville and June would work hard to make the farm a profitable endeavour. Meanwhile, June transformed the tired and neglected farmhouse into a well-loved and comfortable family home, with guests greeted by a beautifully tended garden, situated at the front of the elegant Georgian house. The property boasted the typical, symmetrical frontage of a home of that time period, with its light-coloured brickwork broken up by 5 large white-framed sash windows, and at the centre point stood a white portico supported by 4 columns, where the front door was situated. The elegance of the home continued inside, with a hallway and a sweeping staircase located between the dining room and living room. These both basked in the light from the large rectangular windows. The high ceilings presented an airy appearance, while a fireplace offered warmth. At the rear of the property, beyond these elegant rooms designed to impress visitors, was the heart of the home, a well-used and loved kitchen, from which a set of service stairs ascended, although the treads were covered with clutter. Beyond the kitchen was the scullery and laundry, which formed a hallway, with a door leading out into the farmyard, and another door leading into the den, where Neville Bamber kept his guns in a small cupboard beneath the home's 3rd staircase. This set of stairs led up to the main office used by Neville Bamber, and it had a door which at one time offered access to the hall of the 1st floor. However, this had been blocked off. The home became a popular place for the extended family to visit, with Neville and June doting on their various nieces and nephews who would often stay at the farm during the holidays. This included Pamela's children, David and Anne, with the former recalling that it was, quote, the heart of family gatherings. But June wanted her own children, a desire which after 6 years of marriage burned intensely, and likely contributed to her hospitalisation in 1955 when she suffered a mental breakdown. She received treatment at a private psychiatric facility in London under the care of Dr. Ferguson, who would aid the family on several occasions over the coming years. After her stay was concluded, June was discharged back to Whitehouse Farm, where the multiple empty bedrooms would haunt her. June's struggle to conceive filled her with a feeling of hopelessness, which was intensified when an operation to remove an ovarian cyst caused complications that rendered her unable to bear children. For a woman who had longed to be a mother, this was a devastating blow, and had long-lasting psychological implications, which alongside her religious convictions would drive her behaviour and actions towards others. This would lead to June being demonised following the deaths at the farm. It's here I wish to state that she was a loving mother who wished for her children to be happy, healthy, and have strong moral characters. These children would come into the care of Neville and June when they turned to the Church of England's Children's Society, which was founded in 1881 by Edward Rudolph. The Sunday school teacher had observed 2 of his pupils begging on the street. He learned they were desperately trying to support their mother and her 11 children following the death of their father. Discovering that many other children were suffering, Edward devoted his life to the cause, establishing what would one day become the country's biggest children's charity and adoption agency. June and Neville contacted the Children's Society and were put through various assessments, interviews and medical checks, with references also being required to ensure their suitability. Given that the couple had a stable marriage, were financially secure, and had a supportive family, their applications to adopt were approved, despite June's recent admittance to a psychiatric facility. Having passed all the checks, the couple visited the Holy Innocents Nursery in September 1957, where they were introduced to 2-month-old Phyllis Webb, who had been relinquished by her mother, Christine. Just 17 years old when she learned of her pregnancy, Christine was the daughter of Eric J., a senior chaplain to the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he had assisted at the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953. Incidentally, Eric J. had worked as a chaplain during the war, encountering a young RAF pilot, Neville Bamber, with neither of them aware that one day Neville would adopt Eric's granddaughter. The road to adoption began when Christine had a brief relationship with a 33-year-old dry cleaner from Putney. This affair ended, and shortly afterwards she discovered she was expecting. Christine refused to provide any further details regarding the man's identity, and years later this would prompt speculation in the newspapers, with claims that he was actually someone associated with the church, either a cleric or possibly a theology student. If true, this may have given the story a more sensational edge, but the only person who would ever truly know was Christine, who in 1956 had found herself in an impossible position. The pregnant 17-year-old had no means of supporting herself or her child. She had no prospects of marrying the father, and was faced with the issues of being connected to such a prominent figure within the church. If the pregnancy came to light, it would have caused a scandal. Wishing to protect the family name and their daughter's reputation, Christine was sent to a village near Bath, where she worked as a guest house receptionist, using her mother's maiden name as an alias. She was known as Mrs. Webb, likely to conceal the illegitimate status of her child. Christine's daughter arrived on the 17th of July 1957, a beautiful girl with a shock of dark brown hair and large greyish-blue eyes. For 2 weeks she nursed her baby, gazing down into those adoring eyes, cradling the child close, savouring every moment, as the time grew near when Christine would be forced to give her daughter away. Although Christine longed to keep the child, she was also aware of the implications if she did. She would be an unwed mother with few prospects. It was also a situation which would taint her family's name. Considering all these factors, she felt her only option was to give up the child. This she did on the 1st of August 1957, hopeful that baby Phyllis would be placed in the care of a family who could provide the little girl with the life she knew she was unable to. The adoption agency believed that Neville and June could be that family for Phyllis, and on October the 10th, 1957, the almost 3-month-old infant was brought to her new home at White House Farm. Having already experienced many changes during her short life, Phyllis encountered another when, on the 6th of February 1958, her adoption became official, as did her new name, Sheila Jean Bamber. But the joy of having an infant, filling the home with her babbles, cries and giggles, failed to fill the void that June felt. The child's presence impacted June's mental state, fighting thoughts that she was a failure as a woman and incapable of being a mother, not only due to her infertility, but because she found she was unable to bond with Sheila. Unbeknownst to June, this is actually common for adopted parents. Struggling to manage these intrusive thoughts, June was admitted to St Andrew's Psychiatric Hospital in Northampton, once again under the care of Dr. Ferguson. She was given medication and attended therapy sessions. However, none of this seemed to help, so when she failed to make progress, June was given 6 30-minute-long rounds of electric shock therapy. She appeared to respond well to this treatment, but upon her release the doctors warned that there was a possibility she may relapse. Over the next couple of years, Neville and June enjoyed raising their daughter and proved themselves as the devoted parents they longed to be. Sheila's personality had begun to shine, her shy, awkward nature offset by her kindness and sensitivity, with the little girl freely giving and receiving cuddles to both people and animals. A dreamer with a big imagination, Sheila had started to explore her love of art, which would carry through into her adulthood, along with her quick temper and strong will. Yet her time being June and Neville's only child would come to an end with the adoption of Jeremy Neville Bamber, which was finalised on the 27th of July 1961. His story I shall tell in a future episode. The two children would be raised by Neville and June in the manner in which the couple themselves had been brought up, with the outward displays of emotion being contained behind a reserved and composed exterior. As an adult, Sheila would tell her husband Colin that this approach deprived her of the one thing she longed for the most from her parents, physical affection, although she vehemently stated that they provided for her in every other way. This included June's wish to provide them a firm religious foundation, ensuring they attended church every Sunday, read from the Bible and prayed each night. However, the couple were not so strict when it came to disciplining the children, with many noting that Sheila and Jeremy were spoilt. Rarely was their bad behaviour corrected, and they were given everything they demanded. The rationale for this lack of discipline may be explained by a comment June once made to her nephew David Boutflower, stating, "When you've adopted children, you've to be very, very careful." This implies that June was possibly living in constant fear that if her actions towards the children were seen as wrong, that the agency would take Sheila and Jeremy away. This was a fear that was likely amplified when, at 2 years old, Jeremy suffered a head injury. It was deemed an accident, but it troubled June enough that she expressed her concerns regarding the incident to her psychiatrist, Dr. Ferguson. Jeremy and Sheila were not completely without discipline or affection, with their grandmothers and aunts providing them with both. It was a situation Sheila stated caused her to form a stronger connection with them than she had with her own parents. As she grew older, Sheila began to feel as though she and her brother were an inconvenience, with her under the impression that they had to fit into June and Neville's busy lives. Not only did the Bambers have a farm to run, but Neville had been working as a Justice of the Peace at Witham Magistrates Court since 1961, and June was involved in many aspects of the church and the local community, with her assisting with the flower arranging, helping organise events and delivering Meals on Wheels. She was also on the board of directors at the family-run Allseer Road Caravan Park. Alongside their community activities, the well-respected couple also enjoyed having meals with friends, while Neville would partake in a round of golf, and the pair continued to play tennis. Sheila's feelings of being a hindrance were further complicated when, at 7 years old, she was informed of the adoption. This not only made her feel more disconnected, but also created a sense that she needed to be grateful that they had chosen her, prompting the youngster to go out of her way to show her gratitude, often setting aside her own wants and needs in the process. Having attended the local primary school at Goldhanger, Sheila would transition to Malden Court Preparatory School, where her kind, approachable nature made her a popular pupil. She thrived in the creative subjects of writing and art, but struggled in the more academic classes. At the age of 10, Sheila was blossoming, but events that year would set her back. First came the loss of her beloved aunt, who at just 38 years old was killed when a car she was in struck a lorry. The loss devastated Sheila, who struggled to contend with her emotions, and felt unable to express them, especially to Neville, who, despite it being his sister who had died, did not outwardly show his grief. The young girl, who was still trying to reconcile with the fact that she was adopted, was now also mourning the loss of someone she loved, yet her emotional turmoil would be compounded further. Just 2 months after her aunt's death, 10-year-old Sheila was sent to Moira House boarding school, over 200 miles away from her family, friends, and her new Shih Tzu puppy, Sweepy, whom she had been given on her 10th birthday. This sudden mid-term transfer came as a shock to the youngster, who could not understand why she had been sent away, with her feelings of being rejected by her adopted parents amplified by the rejection she experienced from her fellow pupils who began to bully the newcomer. Already struggling with her studies, Sheila floundered further, only finding solace through her dance and art classes alongside the confidential pages of her diary. Sheila remained at the school until December 1970, when the 13-year-old's persistent requests to be moved were actioned, with some reports speculating she had been expelled, while other sources deny this. Leaving Moira House, Sheila was enrolled at Old Hall School in Heverset, Norfolk. She was still a boarder, residing nearly 70 miles away from home, but the atmosphere of the new school was more welcoming. Sheila developed a large friendship group and enjoyed what she would later recall as some of the happiest years of her life. During this time, her bubbly and funny nature shone through, but what would be her lifelong struggle with confidence was apparent, with self-doubt often holding her back. Yet in other ways she was a free and spontaneous person who embraced her rebellious side. This included sneaking off school grounds after lessons and heading into the nearest town, a practice which was frowned upon by the school. On one occasion, having successfully escaped the school confines, Sheila headed to town with a group of friends. While there, she became separated from them. Alone and having missed the last bus of the night, the teenager began walking along the road towards the school, thumbing a lift as she went. It wasn't long before a car pulled up alongside the youngster, yet the driver's good deed was a facade for his true intentions, as he turned off the road into a secluded spot and made a pass at the girl beside him. Feisty Sheila reprimanded him, declaring that he was a dirty old man and managed to escape the vehicle unharmed. Far from this acting as a deterrent, Sheila would continue to leave school grounds without permission, unwilling to allow other people's actions to prevent her from enjoying life. Sheila's newfound attitude made June worry, with a friend Innes Bowen recalling that June was always very protective towards Sheila and would not let her out of her sight unless I was there. This concern was partially caused by June's realisation that her daughter was becoming a beautiful young woman, with Jeremy's godfather reflecting on June's anxiety, stating, "By the time Sheila was about 15 years old, she was obviously going to be an extremely attractive girl." June became very worried by this, if not obsessed with the attention paid to her daughter by men. To ease June's concerns, her nephew, David Boutflower, would act as a chaperone when Sheila wanted to attend dances. However, the free-spirited, fun-loving teenager still managed to get around her mother's protective behaviour. At 16 years old, Sheila was testing the boundaries, not only by sneaking out of the house to see friends 13 miles away in Colchester, but on at least one occasion she was drinking alcohol in her bedroom. Family friend Susan Wallace recalled that when June caught them with the bottles, her choice of punishment was unusual. Instead of grounding Sheila or withholding pocket money, June decided to take both girls to the theatre, under the belief that the teenagers would be bored. However, it turned into an enjoyable night for the trio. June did try other methods to curb Sheila's rebellious nature, including having her spend time with her cousin Anne, assisting with housework and cooking. But it quickly became clear that Sheila had no inclination of becoming the traditional housewife. Instead, she longed to exchange the quiet, sedate life of the Essex countryside for the hustle and bustle of London. Although she had this ambition, upon leaving school in 1974, Sheila, being someone who lived each day as it came, had no thoughts of what she wanted to do for a livelihood, only knowing that the allure of the capital was calling to her. While 17-year-old Sheila longed to break free, her overprotective mother wanted to keep her close, and as she had done in the years before and since, June turned to her religion to help come to a decision, resulting in her reluctantly agreeing to allow Sheila to move to London. This would be done under the insistence that Sheila enrolled onto a secretarial course and resided in student accommodations. Despite agreeing to the move, June expressed her concerns to acquaintances, and her mental state was exacerbated further by the loss of her two best friends in December 1973. Bottling up her grief, June focused on her work in the church, assisting Neville, who had been appointed the church warden at St. Nicholas's. Yet all June's other social activities fell away, with her confidence waning and her desire for solitude growing. Meanwhile, in September 1974, Sheila, unaware of her mother's internal turmoil, began her secretarial course in London. Sheila embraced her new settings, not because of the course, but for the social aspect, with the 18-year-old accompanying her friends to the pubs and cafes close to the college. And it was within one of these establishments that she caught the eye of 21-year-old ceramics and 3D design student Colin Cathell. The attraction was instantaneous for them both, with the softly spoken Colin recalling that, "As soon as I saw Sheila, I wanted her." Within 2 days, the couple's relationship had progressed to a sexual one. The intensity of the relationship was reflected in the speed at which they met each other's parents, with Colin introducing Sheila to his mother and father, albeit separately as they had recently split, having been married for 30 years. Sheila would develop a strong bond with his parents, who, over the following years, were there for her during the ups and downs of life. Colin was introduced to Neville, whom he found to be a likeable man, whereas June came across as quiet and submissive, seeking her husband's approval before answering questions. However, this was, at the time, she was said to be struggling with depression. It was June whom Colin would struggle to relate to as the years passed, and often she was the cause of the stress within his relationship with Sheila. The only member of the Bambers Colin did not meet straight away was Sheila's brother Jeremy, who was away at boarding school. While her relationship with Colin continued to burn intensely, any enthusiasm she had for the secretarial course had fizzled out, And after 6 months, Sheila embarked on her search for a new career, starting with training to be a hairdresser, before settling on the idea of becoming a model. Sheila was an attractive and photogenic young woman. Her round, pale face, framed by thick, dark, curling locks of hair, while her eyes epitomised her nickname. Known as Bams to her friends and family, it evolved into Bambi, with her bluish-grey gaze filled with the doll-like expression of the famous character. June had reservations regarding Sheila's new career, fearing that her beautiful daughter, who lacked confidence, would suffer in the appearance-focused world of modelling, and that she may be taken advantage of. Despite this, June and Neville supported her endeavour, and sought to assist Sheila in pursuing her dream. They arranged for her to meet with an agency via a family friend. However, Sheila's nerves and lack of confidence led to rejection, but she was unshaken by this early disappointment. Within weeks, her parents had arranged for Ronald Crowe, a photographer from the Essex press, to take photos of Sheila in the gardens of Whitehouse Farm, in order to help fill out her portfolio. Years later, Ronald recalled the shoot, stating, "One of the poses I asked her to do involved her holding a shotgun and a brace of pheasants. I found that Sheila just did not know how to hold a gun at all. It was obvious to me she had no idea at all about guns." Roughly 10 years later, Sheila's ability to wield a firearm would become a point of contention. But for now, the portfolio, alongside her enrolment to the Lucy Clayton Modelling School, paid for by her parents, would help launch her career. It was a vocation which June continued to fret over. Her friend, John Wilkes, recalled that, with this worry, June started showing signs of religious mania. Religion had provided June with guidance and comfort, but as the years progressed, her reliance on it spiraled to the point where it dictated how she lived her life and how she viewed the actions of others. It was these religious leanings which stirred conflict between herself and Sheila, especially after the latter discovered that she was pregnant. 18-year-old Sheila worried over her options. Refusing to consider adoption, she and Colin discussed the prospect of abortion, but as Colin later recalled, she hated the idea and was worried that it might affect future pregnancies. Despite not having the means to support a child, the couple decided to keep the baby and get married. But when they visited Whitehouse Farm just days after breaking the news over the phone, they were greeted with a concerned and steely reception. Neville was level-headed, with him opting to listen to the couple before putting forward his opinions. In contrast, June was vocal in her criticism, utilising her religious ideologies to condemn their sinful actions. However, both parents agreed the couple were not at a stage in their lives where they could provide for a child, with them also voicing concerns regarding the impact it would have on Sheila's modelling career. June convinced her daughter to visit the family doctor to discuss their options, including abortion, after which Sheila opted for the termination. Breaking the news to Colin, she and June headed to Chelmsford Hospital to have the procedure. The abortion exemplified Sheila's desire to please her adoptive parents, setting aside her own wants and making decisions she later regretted. This she did with regards to the abortion, as Colin later recalled. Bams was upset and very unhappy. It screwed her up. But we had no money, we lived on my grant from art school. But we were desperately in love. For June, the pair's actions offended her religious sensibilities, and when Colin called to check how the procedure had gone, she answered the phone, bluntly stating that the relationship needed to end. Yet when he arrived at the farm the following day, June made no mention of their phone conversation, as he and Sheila set off for a walk in the fields. The couple found a secluded sunlit spot, where they undressed to sunbathe and take intimate photos. But it wasn't long before their peace was disturbed by June, who flew into a religious tirade, calling out the pair as sinners and declaring they were being disrespectful for fornicating on her land. The couple hurriedly dressed and headed back to the farmhouse, intent on returning to London immediately. But before they could flee, Sheila would be bombarded with more of June's harsh words. Her mother's religious righteousness rained down, with June declaring that the 18-year-old was the devil's child. This was a barb which struck deep into Sheila's psyche. The couple would return to London, where Sheila told her best friend, Tora Tompkinson, about the fight and admitted she had feared June since childhood. Meanwhile, at White House Farm, June reeled from the explosive parting, which had seen her religious beliefs supersede the love she had for her daughter, unaware the impact her words would have on Sheila's susceptible mind. The argument tormented June, but she tried to repress these feelings, which were soon joined with her internalized grief when her father, Leslie Speakman, passed away in August 1975, increasing her reliance on religion for comfort. In defiance of June's request, Sheila and Colin's relationship continued, with the latter seeing the devastating impact June's words had on his girlfriend. He would also be privy to a different side of Sheila after they moved in together. Her quick and volatile temper surfaced, with him once receiving a black eye, but he later noted that her violence was almost exclusively directed at inanimate objects. Colin swiftly discovered that Sheila tended to target what she knew would cause the most pain, which in his case included breaking his artwork. But as many had observed before, her rage came from a need for reassurance, and Colin felt that she often acted out in order to test how committed he was to their relationship. He also noted that Sheila idolised her father Neville, which caused her to draw comparisons between the two, with Colin being viewed less favourably, as he could never live up to the standards she had modelled around her father. These tensions in the couple's relationship were tested further when in spring of 1977 Sheila discovered she was expecting once more. Yet unlike her previous pregnancy, Sheila was steadfast that she was keeping the baby. The parents supported her decision, albeit with some caveats, with them insisting that the couple were to marry prior to the birth and move away from London. The latter being a condition Sheila and Colin refused to consider. However, they would go ahead with the wedding. Sheila had dreamed of a big fairy tale union, envisioning walking down the aisle of her family church in a white gown. But June vetoed these plans by declaring, quote, "Not in my church." She also refused to have the reception in a marquee at White House Farm, something which had been a tradition whenever a family member was married. Instead, Sheila's reception would take place in a motel several miles away. Furthermore, Sheila was forbidden from wearing white, perhaps because, in June's mind, her daughter no longer embodied the virginal purity the colour represented. On the 14th of May 1977, the wedding, which was a low-key affair, took place at Chelmsford Registry Office, with the bride wearing a cream gown. Although it may not have been the day she dreamed of, Sheila still beamed with joy as she and Colin stepped out of the venue as husband and wife. The bliss of being newlyweds and soon-to-be parents was cruelly torn away from them, with Sheila suffering the devastating loss of their baby at 5.5 months gestation. Initially, Sheila seemed to refuse to accept the death that occurred, but this gave way to anger and guilt, as she considered whether her earlier fears that an abortion would affect future pregnancies had come to fruition. Amidst her unbearable grief, June and Neville tried to show their support in a manner they were most accustomed. They offered to buy the couple an antique store and find them somewhere to live in Goldhanger, believing being close to family would help. But when Sheila and Colin remained adamant about residing in the capital, her parents offered to purchase a flat for them in Hampstead. However, Sheila would not have time to enjoy moving into her new place, as she had secured a modelling assignment in Japan, which led to her being out of the country for over 2 months, leaving Colin to handle the move alone. But it was not the assignment Sheila had hoped for. Instead, she found herself alone in a foreign country, frightened, exhausted, and physically uncomfortable, as she was forced to entertain the guests of her bosses, while rejecting their unwanted advances. Sheila spoke of the impact the assignment was having on her mental state during frequent letters to Colin. In one she wrote, "I really think I should go to a psychiatrist when I get back. It's almost as if I'm schizophrenic or something. I feel so sick of people and stale." The woman who returned to England was not the one who had left for Japan 2 months earlier. Her confidence was completely spent. She became withdrawn and was convinced there was something wrong with her. Join me next time as I continue to explore Sheila's life, the joys and the tragedies, her fraught relationship with her mother, and the impact these had on her psychologically.
So in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.